Most people think they have to work harder to attract money. Florence Scovel Shinn taught something different. That your financial future isn't something you chase, it's something you write. Not metaphorically, literally with your own hand. If you've done the affirmations, said the right words, prayed the right prayers, and money still feels like it's circling somewhere just out of reach, this is why. You've been speaking your abundance. You were never taught to script it. There's a difference. And once you understand it, you'll see why nothing you've tried before quite landed. In the next few minutes, you'll learn the exact 3-step scripting method Florence Scovel Shinn used with her own clients. The same method that turned vague hope into claimed specific reality. Simple, takes minutes, and it changes what your money is actually listening to. Stay with me. By the end, you'll know exactly what to write tonight. Eleanor kept the affirmation cards in a kitchen drawer. 43 of them, handwritten over the years, each one a different version of the same hope. I am prosperous. Money comes to me easily. I release fear and welcome abundance. She said them out loud every morning, standing at the counter with her coffee going cold. And she meant every word. She had meant them for 11 years. There was a rhythm to it. Coffee on, cards out. Read through all 43, or as many as there was time for, then back in the drawer before her husband came down for breakfast. Not because it was a secret exactly, just something private, something she didn't especially want explained. She had added a new card maybe once a year. She had never removed one. What she never did, not once in those 11 years, was write a single one of them in a notebook and let it stay there. Dated, specific, unfinished, looking on purpose so she'd have to come back and finish it. She had journals. She'd started several. Gratitude lists, mostly, abandoned by February. Nothing that looked like a claim. Nothing with her name on a specific number, a specific date, a specific life she was declaring rather than hoping for. She didn't notice the pattern until the afternoon her niece, 26, newly promoted, glowing in a way Eleanor remembered being able to glow once a long time ago, sat across from her at that same kitchen table and almost shyly showed her a page from a journal. Not a vision board. Not a Pinterest quote. Just a lined page with a date at the top and a paragraph underneath, written in the present tense, describing a raise and a title that hadn't happened yet as though they already had. I wrote this in March, her niece said. I forgot about it, honestly. Found it again last week after HR called. 2 weeks later it had happened. Almost exactly as written. Not close enough to count. Exact. The number matched. Title matched. Even a detail about a corner office her niece had thrown in almost as a joke, not really believing it, had matched. Eleanor said the polite thing. That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of you. And she meant that too. But underneath the politeness, something in her went very quiet and very still, the way it does when a person realizes, all at once and without wanting to, that she has been doing the same thing for a decade and calling it faith. 43 cards. 11 years. And in all that time, she had never once done the one thing her 26-year-old niece had done almost by accident, in a $5 notebook, without a single class or coach or system to guide her. She drove home that evening turning it over. It wasn't that she didn't believe in the cards. She did. It wasn't that she thought her niece had gotten lucky. Some part of her, the part that had read Florence Scovel Shinn on and off for years without ever quite finishing the book, knew better than that. It was something else. Something closer to a question she didn't want to ask herself yet. What exactly was the difference between what she had been doing every morning at that counter, and what her niece had done once, in March, in 10 quiet minutes? She wouldn't have an answer for another 6 weeks. But the question sat with her, the way certain questions do, refusing to be filed away with the gratitude journals in the drawer. She found herself, over those weeks, noticing her own cards differently. Money comes to me easily. Comes from where, exactly? By when? In what form? The card didn't say. It had never had to, because saying it out loud and putting it back in the drawer had never asked anything more specific of her. Her niece's page, by contrast, had a date at the top and a number in the second paragraph. It wasn't a wish. It read like a memory of something that hadn't happened yet. Eleanor started leaving the cards out on the counter a little longer some mornings, trying to name what was missing. She couldn't, not yet. But she stopped putting the last one away as quickly as she used to. Here is what that question leads to, and it's the reason this video exists. What Florence Scovel Shinn understood nearly 100 years before journaling became a wellness trend is that the spoken word and the written word are not the same instrument, even when they carry the same sentence. And once you understand exactly why, you'll know what to do differently starting tonight. It comes down to 3 deliberate steps. And the first one isn't about writing anything down at all. It's about what has to happen on the page before a single true word can land. Florence Scovel Shinn never dismissed the spoken word. She built much of her teaching on it. The decree, the claim spoken in the present tense, without qualification. But she made a distinction that most people who quote her have never quite absorbed. Speech is instantaneous, and the subconscious mind, the part of you that actually does the work of arranging circumstance, is not moved by instance. It's moved by impression, by something pressed in and left there. Think of it the way you'd think of a signature. You can say your own name 1,000 times a day and it changes nothing about a document. But sign it once, in ink on the right page, and something formally, undeniably shifts. Not because the sound of your name lacks power, the opposite. Because the written version stays where you put it, and cannot quietly be unsaid. The subconscious does not evaluate your affirmations for sincerity. It reads for repetition, specificity, and permanence. And a spoken sentence, gone the instant it's finished, simply doesn't carry the same weight as one that continues to exist after you've stopped saying it. Which is why scripting isn't a nicer word for affirming. It's a different mechanism entirely. And Shinn's own approach to it, distilled from her casework and her private notes, moves through 3 deliberate stages. Not because 3 is a magic number, but because each stage does something the others can't, and skipping one is the reason most people's journals fill up with hope and empty out with nothing to show for it. The first stage has almost nothing to do with writing what you want. It has to do with what's already been written. Underneath, without your permission, over years you don't fully remember. Shinn called it, in different places, different things. Erasing the old blueprint, cancelling the false claim, clearing the slate before the new decree. I'll call it what it functionally is. The divine eraser. Here is the problem it solves. Most people sit down to script new abundance directly on top of an old, unexamined belief. Money is hard to keep. People like me don't get lucky. I always have to fight for what I have, and wonder months later why the new words never seem to take. They didn't fail. They were overwritten. You cannot script a claim of abundance in the same hand that, an hour earlier, complained about the electric bill and meant it. The complaint doesn't cancel out politely. It sits underneath the new page like a watermark, showing through everything written over it. So before a single word of the new script goes down, there's a release. Not a long one, not a therapeutic excavation of every financial fear you've ever had. That's its own kind of trap, the kind that keeps a person circling the wound instead of leaving it. Just one honest sentence, written first, naming what's actually been running underneath. Then, immediately a cancellation. Shinn's own phrase for this cancellation, one she gave students to speak and write together. I cast every burden upon the Christ within, and I go free to be prosperous. Say it as what it is, not a request, a release. You are not asking to be forgiven for lack. You are setting the old claim down deliberately. The way you'd set down a bag you've been carrying so long your arm forgot it was heavy. Here is how this looks on the page practically tonight. Open the notebook. At the top of the first page, write the sentence you've never let yourself write in your own hand. The actual belief, the ungenerous one, the one you'd never say out loud to anyone who mattered. I believe money always runs out before I do. I believe people like me work twice as hard for half as much. Whatever it is, write it once, plainly, without decorating it or softening it. Then, directly beneath it, write the release. Not a rebuttal. Not an argument with the first line. A release. I cast every burden upon the Christ within, and I go free to be prosperous. Some people draw a single line through the first sentence after writing the second. Some close the notebook for a moment and breathe before continuing. There's no required ritual here. Only the honesty of naming the old claim, and the deliberateness of setting it down before you write anything new on the same page. This is the step people skip because it feels less productive than writing what you want. It doesn't produce a wish list. It produces silence, briefly, where an old pattern used to run. But it's the reason the second step, the one where you actually script the life you're claiming, lands on clean ground instead of contested ground. You wouldn't build a house on a foundation you hadn't first cleared of the old one. The page deserves the same courtesy. There's an old word for a page that's been written on, scraped clean, and written on again. Palimpsest. Medieval scribes did this out of necessity. Parchment was expensive, so an old manuscript would be washed and scraped and reused for something new. And for centuries afterward, under the right light, at the right angle, the old text would still be faintly visible beneath the new one. Scholars have spent whole careers recovering lost writings this way, reading ghost sentences bleeding through what was supposedly written over them. Your mind works like this more often than you'd like. You write, "I am provided for," over the top of 30 years of watching your mother count coins at the kitchen table with her jaw tight, and the new sentence sits there, technically true, technically spoken, and the old text bleeds through anyway, faint but present, shaping what you actually expect to happen even while your mouth says something else. This is not a character flaw. It's just how layered writing works, whether it's parchment or belief. And it's exactly why the erasure has to come first, deliberately, rather than being left to happen on its own underneath the new script. Shinn worked with a woman. The details are sparse, as they often are in her case notes, but the shape of the story is clear, who had been affirming prosperity for months with a kind of grim determination, treating the affirmation almost as a chore, a discipline she performed whether she felt it or not. Shinn asked her at some point what she actually believed about money, underneath the affirmation. The woman resisted the question. She said she'd already dealt with that she'd moved past it, that dwelling on old beliefs seemed counterproductive to a practice built on focusing forward. Shinn didn't argue with her directly. She simply asked her to write down once on paper what she'd say about money if no one, including herself, would ever read it. The woman wrote, after a long pause, that she believed she would always be one bad year away from losing everything, no matter how much she had. She'd never said this out loud, not even to herself in so many words. It had simply been running underneath, for as long as she could remember, through every affirmation she'd ever spoken over it. That single sentence, written and looked at honestly, did more in one sitting than 4 months of daily affirmation had managed. Not because the affirmations were wrong, because they'd been layered over a page that had never been cleared. This is the part worth being honest about tonight before you write anything else. The belief you're erasing is very often not the one you'd guess at first. It's rarely something dramatic. It's usually something small and specific and slightly embarrassing. A fear of being caught unprepared, a suspicion that ease has to be paid for later, a quiet certainty that people like you don't get to relax about this. You'll know it's the right one when writing it down feels a little uncomfortable. The vague, general fears don't cost anything to name. The true one usually does. Write it. One sentence. Then, underneath it, the release. I cast every burden upon the Christ within, and I go free to be prosperous. Not as a correction of the first sentence. Releases don't argue, they simply set down. Some nights this takes 30 seconds. Some nights the first sentence takes longer to find than you'd expect. And that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're finally looking directly at the page instead of writing hopefully over the top of it. Do this once, tonight, before you move to what comes next. Not as a ritual you'll repeat for weeks, though you can if a particular belief keeps resurfacing. As a single, deliberate clearing, so that what you write in the next step lands on a page that's actually blank, rather than one still faintly readable underneath. One more thing worth saying because it tends to trip people up here. The erasure is not the same as dwelling. There's a version of this practice that curdles into rumination, writing the old belief, then writing it again the next night, circling it, mistaking analysis for release. That's not what this step asks. You name it once. You write the release once, directly beneath it. Then you close the page and don't reopen it to check whether the release worked. Faith here means trusting the clearing happened without needing evidence of it. The same way you don't dig up a seed to see if it's taken root. If the old belief resurfaces later, and it may, quietly on an ordinary Tuesday, that's not proof the erasure failed. It's the old handwriting catching the light again for a moment. You don't repeat the whole process from scratch. You simply notice it, let it pass, and trust the page beneath it. With the old page cleared, the second step is where most people's instincts betray them, because everything in ordinary life has taught you to ask for things you don't yet have in the tense of not yet having them. I hope to. I'm working toward. Someday I will. It's polite. It's realistic. And Florence Scovel Shinn considered it one of the quieter ways a person unknowingly pushes their good further away. She put it plainly. Divine supply now meets divine demand. Not will meet. Not is trying to meet. The demand and the supply exist in the same present moment, already in contact with each other. And the only real gap is the one your own language keeps insisting on maintaining. This is the heart of the second step. You do not script, I will be financially secure, or I want to feel calm about money. You write the scene as though you are standing inside it already. Specific, sensory, present tense, the way you describe something you did this morning rather than something you're hoping for by next year. Here is what this looks like in practice, and it matters more than it sounds like it should. Not, I will have money in my account. Instead, I open my banking app and see a balance that covers everything I need, with room left over. I feel my shoulders drop when I see it. I'm not surprised by it. I expected it. Notice the difference. The second version isn't bigger or more elaborate. It's simply already happening on the page, in the only tense that speaks to the part of your mind that does the actual building. There's an old habit in certain homes of setting a place at the table for a guest before they've arrived. The plate down, the glass filled, the chair pulled out, 20 minutes ahead of the knock at the door. It isn't wishful. It isn't naive. It's a small, ordinary act of certainty. The household has already decided the guest is coming, and it arranges itself accordingly, in advance, without waiting for confirmation. Scripting in the present of certainty works the same way. You're not hoping the guest arrives. You're setting the table because you already know they will. This is also, if I'm honest, where most people who try this alone tend to quietly give up. Not because the technique fails, but because doing it consistently, in a way that actually holds when the fear creeps back in on a hard week, benefits enormously from having other people doing it alongside you, comparing notes, catching each other's old habits creeping back into the language. If you're finding this useful, subscribing keeps you here for the rest of it, including the third step, which is where this actually becomes something you live inside rather than something you write once and set down. Back to the page. The present tense scene doesn't need to be long. A paragraph is enough, sometimes even a few sentences, as long as they're specific rather than general. Vague abundance doesn't give the subconscious anything to build toward. I have enough money is true and does almost nothing. I pay the mortgage on the first of the month without checking the account first, because I already know it's there, gives the mind an actual scene to inhabit, a specific certainty to step into rather than a mood to hope for. Write it as though describing something that already happened this morning. Not what you're manifesting. What you're remembering from a life that's already begun. There's a resistance that shows up here for almost everyone, worth naming before it catches you off guard. Writing, I already have this, when your bank balance says otherwise can feel, at first, like lying. Not spiritually daring, just factually dishonest, the way it would feel to write a check you knew would bounce. This discomfort is normal. It's not a sign you're doing the practice wrong. It's a sign you're asking your imagination to do work it hasn't been asked to do before. Hold a truth that hasn't caught up to the calendar yet. Shinn addressed this with a client who came to her uneasy about exactly this. Shinn didn't tell her to ignore the discomfort. She told her the imagination is the workshop where every future fact is built before it appears in the visible world, and that what felt like pretending was, more precisely, rehearsal. The same way an actor doesn't lie by inhabiting a role before opening night, they simply arrive early to a truth the audience hasn't seen yet. The client kept writing. Uneasy at first every single night. Then simply present. Then, some weeks later, factually accurate. The balance had caught up to the sentence, quietly, without ceremony, once the sentence had been held steadily enough for long enough. You may feel exactly what she felt, writing your own scene tonight. Write it anyway. The discomfort isn't a red flag. It's the sound of a new habit being installed in a mind that's used to something else. One question comes up constantly once people start this practice. Do you write a new scene every night, or return to the same one? The honest answer is that returning matters more than most people expect, and starting fresh every evening, as tempting and creative as it feels, is often quietly self-sabotaging. Here's why. A new scene each night means the subconscious never gets more than a glancing impression of any single claim before you've moved on to describing something else. It's the difference between reading the same letter 50 times, each reading sinking it a little deeper, versus reading 50 different letters once each. Depth comes from return, not from novelty. Shinn's own students were often given a single sentence, sometimes a single phrase, and asked to hold it for weeks. Not because Shinn lacked imagination, but because she understood that conviction is built through repetition of the same specific claim, not through a rotating gallery of hopeful scenes. So the practice in its steadier form looks like this. You write the present tense scene once with real specificity, and then you return to that same page. Reading it, sometimes rewriting it in slightly more detail, sometimes simply reading it silently, for several nights, even several weeks before moving to a new claim. You're not stuck if it doesn't produce anything by night 3. You're building the impression Shinn described, the one that has to be pressed in before it can be read by the part of the mind that arranges the actual circumstances of your life. There will be nights, being honest, when you sit down to read your own page and feel nothing. No conviction, no warmth, just words on paper that seem, in that particular mood, faintly ridiculous. This is not a sign to stop, and it is also not a sign to force enthusiasm you don't have. Shinn's own guidance here was closer to faithfulness than intensity. You show up to the page whether or not it moves you that night, the same way you'd keep watering a seed on a day you didn't feel like gardening. The feeling isn't the mechanism. The return is. If a scene genuinely stops fitting, if the specific claim starts to feel dishonest rather than uncomfortable, which are two different sensations worth telling apart, that's a signal to revise it, not to abandon the whole practice. Discomfort that feels like stretching is the practice working. Discomfort that feels like actively lying to yourself usually means the scene needs adjusting to something you can inhabit more honestly, even if it's a smaller claim than the one you started with. A specific, believable scene held steadily outperforms a grand, unbelievable one abandoned after 4 days, every time. This is also where most people quietly wonder whether any of this is really working, whether the page is doing anything at all beneath the surface of an ordinary week. That question deserves an honest answer, and it isn't the one most spiritual content gives you. The honest answer is that you will not feel the shift happening. You'll feel mostly like a person writing sentences in a notebook before bed, occasionally moved by them, occasionally bored by them, rarely certain any of it is doing anything at all. The change, when it comes, tends to arrive sideways. A decision made a little more calmly than it would have been 3 months ago, an old fear that used to seize you barely registering the week it would have ruined before, an opportunity noticed and taken instead of talked yourself out of. It rarely announces itself as the result of the notebook. It simply shows up as who you've quietly become. This is, in fact, the exact gap that stopped so many people before they ever got this far. Not a failure of the technique, but a very reasonable, very human hesitation about writing anything down at all before they'd even tried. There's a reason so many journals get started and abandoned by the second week. And it isn't lack of discipline. It has to do with what happens the moment pen actually touches paper. Something Eleanor, the woman from earlier, ran headlong into on the very first night she tried. Here is the answer to the question Eleanor sat with for 6 weeks in her kitchen, turning it over without knowing yet what she was turning. What was the difference between 43 spoken cards and 1 written page? Florence Scovel Shinn ran into the same question directly with a client of her own, a woman who had spoken the same prosperity affirmation daily for well over a year, faithfully, sincerely, with no visible change in her circumstances at all. When Shinn finally suggested she write it down, just once in her own hand on paper, the woman hesitated. Not briefly. Long enough that Shinn asked her plainly what was wrong. The woman admitted something she hadn't said out loud before, not even to herself. Speaking the words cost her nothing. If they didn't work, she could quietly tell herself she hadn't really tried, that it had only been a habit, a nice morning ritual, nothing to stake anything on. But writing them down, dating them, making a record in her own handwriting, would mean that if the failure came, it would be documented, provable. Hers in ink, with no way to later pretend she hadn't really believed it. That is the fear sitting underneath so many years of faithful, unanswered affirmation. And it rarely announces itself as fear. It dresses itself as caution, as realism, as simply preferring to keep things private. But at its center is a very human, very understandable unwillingness to risk something on paper that might not come true, because an unspoken hope can be quietly revised or abandoned without witness, and a written one has to be reckoned with, one way or the other. Eleanor didn't know this story the night she finally sat down with a $5 notebook, 6 weeks after her niece's visit, the question still unanswered. But she felt its shape anyway in her own hand, quite literally, because her hand shook slightly, absurdly, over a blank page in a pen, the way it might shake before signing something that mattered. She noticed the shaking. She almost put the pen down. And then she wrote it anyway. One honest sentence about what she actually believed, underneath the 43 cards about money and about herself. Then, beneath it, the release. Then, on the same page, in the present tense, a single paragraph describing a life she hadn't yet arrived at, as though she were already standing in it. She has kept every page since. Not because the first one felt triumphant. She'll tell you plainly if you ask her that it didn't. It felt small and slightly foolish, and a little too honest for comfort. What she'll also tell you is that she kept going anyway, most nights, returning to the same claim rather than writing something new each time, faithful rather than dramatic about it. 11 months later, the difference was no longer a feeling she had to convince herself of. It was a life that had rearranged itself quietly around the pages. A job change she wouldn't have had the nerve to pursue a year earlier. A conversation about money with her husband that went nothing like the ones from before. A version of the counter and coffee morning that looked almost the same on the surface and felt entirely different underneath. 43 spoken cards had kept her safe for 11 years. One written page, returned to honestly, had moved her in 11 months. This is the part worth sitting with before we go any further. The fear of writing it down is not a character flaw, and it is not a sign your faith is weak. It is simply the last checkpoint before the practice becomes real. The moment where speaking your good, which costs nothing, becomes claiming it, which asks something of you. Eleanor's hand shook. Yours might too. Write anyway. If you've been putting this off, telling yourself you'll start once you find the right notebook, the right time of night, the right words, notice that this is the exact hesitation we've just named, wearing its favorite disguise. There is no right notebook. There was no right night for Eleanor either. There was only an ordinary Tuesday, a shaking hand, and one honest sentence followed by a release, written before she felt ready, because readiness was never actually going to arrive first. There's one more step after this, and it's the one that turns the page from a private claim into a lived reality. The part where you don't just write the certainty, you start acting like the person who already has it. There's a story told about Florence Scovel Shinn, not one of her formal case studies, but the kind of story that circulated among her students because it captured something her longer teachings sometimes didn't. A woman came to her wanting a new home, and Shinn, instead of offering another affirmation, told her to go and buy something for it. Not the house itself. Something small. A set of good hangers, maybe, or a piece of furniture she'd use once she moved. Buy it now, Shinn told her, before there's anywhere to put it. Let your actions catch up to your claim, instead of waiting for the claim to prove itself before you're willing to move. This is the third step, and it's the one most people skip entirely because it asks something the first two didn't. Erasing the old belief happens quietly, on a page where no one else has to know. Scripting the present of certainty happens the same way. Private, internal, contained to a notebook. But acting as if the claim is already true happens out in your actual life, where it can be seen, where it risks looking a little premature, a little presumptuous to anyone watching. Shinn's own phrase for the affirmation that anchors this step. I am financially fearless. I spend money under divine guidance, knowing my supply is endless. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, I will be financially fearless once I have more. It claims the fearlessness first, as a present condition, the same way the scripted scene in Step 2 claimed the balance first, before the calendar had caught up. Here is what this looks like practically, and it doesn't require a large gesture. It requires one small, deliberate action that matches the life you've been writing rather than the anxiety you've been managing. If your script describes a woman who pays her bills without checking the account first because she already knows it's covered, then somewhere this week, in some small way, you act like that woman. Not recklessly, but without the compulsive checking, the reflexive tightening, the old posture of scarcity you've been writing your way out of on paper. This might mean buying the good notebook instead of the cheapest one, on the theory that the woman in your script wouldn't hesitate over a few dollars for something she uses every night. It might mean setting aside a small amount for something that has nothing to do with survival. A book, a nice dinner, a class you've wanted to take. Not as an indulgence you feel guilty about, but as a quiet demonstration to yourself that the money moving through your life moves for pleasure too, not only for emergencies. It might simply mean walking into a room, a meeting, a conversation about money, with a settled posture of someone who already has what she's claiming, instead of the braced posture of someone still waiting to find out. The scale of the action matters far less than its honesty. A small act performed as evidence of who you already are does more than a large gesture performed out of anxious hope that it will finally make something happen. Shinn's student didn't need to furnish the whole house before she had it. She needed one drawer of hangers, bought in confidence, sitting in a closet that didn't exist yet, proof to her own mind that she'd already decided. A word of honesty here, because this step is the one most easily misunderstood into something reckless. Acting as if is not the same as ignoring your actual bills, overspending to perform a confidence you don't yet have the means for, or treating financial prudence as a lack of faith. Shinn herself was precise about this, and it's worth being precise about too. The fearlessness in her affirmation is a posture toward money, not a suspension of good judgment about it. The woman who buys hangers for a home she hasn't moved into yet is still, presumably, paying her current rent. The act is small and symbolic on purpose, a gesture of certainty sized to what you can actually afford to demonstrate, not a leap that creates the very scarcity you're trying to script your way out of. What this step asks for, more than money spent, is a shift in posture. The difference between moving through your financial life braced for the next problem and moving through it as someone who has already been provided for. That shift shows up in small, unremarkable ways more often than dramatic ones. Answering a bill without your stomach tightening first, making a decision about an expense from calm rather than fear, letting yourself enjoy something you paid for instead of quietly resenting the cost the whole time. Practice this, in whatever small size fits your actual circumstances, and you'll find the written pages and the lived posture begin to reinforce each other. The notebook shaping how you move through a Tuesday, and the Tuesday in turn making the notebook easier to believe. Eleanor's niece came for dinner again this spring. Almost a year to the week since that first afternoon with the notebook at the kitchen table. Different kitchen table now. Eleanor and her husband had moved, 6 months earlier, into a house with a room she'd once described, in a paragraph written in the present tense on an ordinary Tuesday night, as though she were already sitting in it. Her niece noticed the room before Eleanor said anything about it. Noticed, too, something harder to name. A settledness in the way Eleanor talked about money that hadn't been there the year before, when the affirmation cards still lived in a kitchen drawer and got read out loud, faithfully, over coffee that went cold. "You seem different," her niece said, not entirely sure what she meant by it. Eleanor thought about the 3 things it had actually taken. Not 43 cards recited for 11 years. 3 deliberate acts, returned to honestly most nights for less than a year. A page that named what she actually believed and released it. A scene written in the present tense and revisited until it stopped feeling like fiction. A small, ordinary act each week that matched the woman on the page instead of the woman still waiting for proof. She didn't try to explain all of it at the table. She said instead almost exactly what her niece had said to her the year before, not realizing at the time how much weight it would carry. I wrote it down. And then I just kept showing up to the page. Her niece asked, half joking, whether she still had the 43 cards. Eleanor did, as it happened. In the same kitchen drawer in the new house, moved over along with everything else. She hadn't thrown them out. She'd simply stopped needing them to carry the whole weight of the practice alone. They sat there now more like old photographs than active tools. Evidence of a version of herself who'd been trying, faithfully, with the only method she'd known at the time. This is the whole of it, distilled past the 3 steps and the affirmations and the case studies, down to something small enough to carry with you tonight. Speaking your good is real, and it matters, and Florence Scovel Shinn never asked anyone to stop. But speaking alone leaves the claim floating, untethered, easy to doubt on a hard day and easy to abandon on a harder one. Writing it, clearing what's underneath it, scripting it in the tense of already true, and letting your actions quietly agree with the page, gives your good somewhere to stand. A place with a date on it. A place you can return to on the nights your faith runs thin and find, in your own handwriting, evidence that you meant this before you had any proof it was working. You don't need 43 cards. You don't need a system or a course or anyone's permission to begin. You need one notebook, one honest sentence about what's actually been running underneath your hope, one release, and one scene written as though this evening were already the evening it came true. Then you need to come back to it. Not perfectly. Not every single night without exception. Faithfully, the way Eleanor did, the way the woman in Shinn's case notes eventually did, the way anyone does who decides that a written claim deserves more from them than a spoken one ever asked for. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a practice like this once it's been kept for a while. Not the loud certainty of someone who's proven something, but the calmer certainty of someone who's simply stopped needing to prove it. Eleanor doesn't talk about her notebook much these days. She doesn't need to. The room her niece noticed does the talking these days, and so does the way Eleanor answers a question about money now. Unhurried, unguarded, the way a person answers when the answer stopped being a performance a long time ago. If tonight is the night you start, don't wait for the version of yourself that feels ready, certain, unshaken. That version tends to show up after the notebook, not before it. Start with the hand that shakes a little. Write the sentence you've never let yourself write. Release it. Then write the life you're claiming in the only tense that ever actually builds anything. Not someday, but now, already, this evening on this page. Let's do this together right now before the video ends. Not as homework for later, but as something you begin in this moment, even if you finish it tonight in your own notebook. Take a breath first. Not a long ritual. Just enough to arrive here, in this moment, instead of still half in whatever you were doing before you press play. Step 1. Silently, or on paper if you have it near you, name the belief. Not the polished version. The real one. The sentence you'd never say out loud to anyone who mattered. Let it be uncomfortable. That's how you know it's the right one. Hold it for a moment clearly, honestly. Now release it. Say it with me, either out loud or in your mind. I cast every burden upon the Christ within, and I go free to be prosperous. Feel the difference between the sentence you just named and the one you just spoke. One was a weight you've been carrying without noticing. The other is you setting it down, deliberately, on purpose, right now. Step 2. Picture the scene, not vaguely, specifically. The account balance. The bill paid without a flinch. The conversation about money that goes calm instead of tight. Whatever it is for you, see it clearly. And say it in the present tense, as though it's already true. Divine supply now meets divine demand. Let that be true for you right now, in this exact moment, regardless of what the calendar says. Step 3. Notice one small action available to you this week that would match the person in that scene. Not a leap. Something small and honest. A decision made from calm instead of fear. A moment of spending or saving that reflects certainty rather than anxiety. Just notice it. You'll know what it is. You already do. That's the practice. 3 steps, a few minutes, and a notebook that's waiting for you to make it real in your own handwriting tonight. If you did that with me just now, even quietly, even skeptically, even with your hand nowhere near a pen, notice what that took. It took a small willingness to consider for a moment that the sentence might be true before you had proof of it. That's the entire practice, really, compressed into the 3 minutes we just spent together. Everything else, the notebook, the returning to the same page night after night, the small actions that follow, is simply that same willingness extended over time until it stops feeling like willingness and starts feeling like who you actually are. You don't need to have this perfected tonight. Eleanor didn't. The woman in Shinn's case notes didn't either. Not on the first page, not for a while. What both of them had was a willingness to begin before they felt ready, and a willingness to return to it faithfully, on ordinary nights, long after the novelty had worn off. That's available to you tonight exactly as much as it was available to either of them. Before you go, if something in this settled in you before I finished saying it, that recognition wasn't an accident. That's the part of you that already knew. Tell me in the comments which sentence you're writing tonight. The release or the scene or both. I read them, and there's something powerful about seeing your own claim typed out where it can't quietly be taken back. And if you want a part 2, going deeper into scripting a specific number, a specific date, the exact proof you're waiting for, say so below. I'm listening for that, and this channel grows from exactly those requests. If someone in your life needs to hear this today, a friend who stopped believing this kind of change is possible for her, a sister who's been affirming for years without writing a single word down, send her this video. Let her borrow your certainty until hers catches up. Subscribe if you want to keep walking this with me. Not so you don't miss a video, so your abundance has company on the way to you, and so the notebook you start tonight has somewhere to keep growing. There's just one more thing I want to leave you with before we close. There's a particular kind of silence that exists only in a room where someone has just finished writing something true. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a room where a page has just been closed, where ink is still slightly wet, where a sentence now exists in the world that didn't exist an hour before. Florence Scovel Shinn spent much of her life trying to describe what happens in that silence, and most of her language for it, decree, claim, present tense, divine supply, was really just her attempt to name something simpler than any of those words managed to hold. That a person, alone at a table, with nothing but a pen and an honest sentence, is doing something closer to construction than to hope. Eleanor knows this now, though she wouldn't put it in those words. She'd probably just say the notebook worked, in the plain, undramatic way she says most things. She wouldn't tell you it was magic. She'd tell you it was Tuesday nights, mostly, and a pen that occasionally still felt heavy in her hand, and a decision, made once and then remade quietly for almost a year, to write down what she actually wanted instead of only ever saying it out loud where it cost her nothing. You have that same pen available to you tonight. You have had it the whole time, actually. Through every card you've ever spoken and put away, every affirmation that dissolved back into the air the moment you finished saying it. Nothing about your situation has to change before you pick it up. The notebook doesn't ask you to already believe. It only asks you to write as though you're willing to find out. Florence Scovel Shinn never promised this would be easy, and I won't pretend to you that it is. There will be nights the page feels foolish. There will be a week, maybe more than one, where nothing in your circumstances seems to be moving at all, and the old cards in the drawer will look, for a moment, like the more sensible choice. Safer at least, because they never asked you to risk anything on paper. That feeling is not evidence the practice has failed you. It's simply the oldest part of you, the part that learned long ago to keep its hopes unwritten so they'd never have to be reckoned with, making its case one more time before it finally, quietly lets go. Let it make its case. Write anyway. Not because the writing guarantees anything on any particular timeline. Shinn was honest about that too, in her own way, always careful never to promise a date. But because a written claim, returned to faithfully, has somewhere to stand that a spoken one never did. And somewhere to stand is, in the end, all any of us are really asking for. Not certainty handed to us from outside. A place, made by our own hand, where we can stand steadily enough to let the certainty grow. Think, for a moment, of everyone who has ever changed the direction of their life with nothing more than a page and an honest sentence. Not people with more resources than you, or more time, or some advantage you weren't given. Just people willing to put something down in ink that hadn't happened yet, and willing to keep faith with that sentence on the ordinary nights when nothing about their circumstances seemed to be moving. The notebook doesn't ask for talent. It doesn't ask for money you don't have yet, or confidence you haven't earned yet, or proof of anything at all. It asks only for honesty about where you actually stand, and a willingness to write just as honestly about where you're choosing to stand instead. Somewhere tonight, there's a blank page waiting the way Eleanor's was waiting, the way every page waits before someone decides it's going to hold something true. It doesn't know yet what you'll write on it. Neither really do you, not entirely, not until the pen moves. That's not a reason to hesitate. It's simply what beginning looks like every time for everyone who's ever done it. Open the notebook tonight. Write what's true underneath the hope. Release it. Then write the life you're claiming, in the only tense that ever builds anything. Not someday. Ready. This evening on this page in your own hand, where it will still be waiting for you tomorrow, whether or not you feel ready when you close it. Thank you for being here and for staying until the end. That's rarer than people think, and it matters. I'll see you in the next one.